This presentation is brought to you by the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center. The Behavior and Mental Health Technical Assistance Center is made possible through a collaboration between the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University and the West Virginia Department of Education's Office of Special Education and Student Support. Today's presentation is titled Trauma-Informed Distance Learning, Supporting Vulnerable Students Remotely During COVID-19. Our presenter is Tiffany Hendershot, Behavior Support Specialist with the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center.
All right, thanks, Jim. So as Jim said, today we're going to be talking about trauma-informed distance learning, supporting vulnerable students remotely during COVID-19. And I'm really excited to see that so many people have joined. That tells me that a lot of you guys are worried right now about your vulnerable students and that you're looking for ways to support them. So just a reminder that this is a collaborative project between the West Virginia Department of Education and the office I work for is the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center, and we're part of the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University. This is just an overview of what participants will leave with, and actually I did create a PDF about 2 weeks ago that it is a checklist that goes through all the things that we're going to talk about today, but it's a one-pager. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have that on our website. So afterwards, if you want to check out the PDF and just have a one-page checklist that you can share with your staff. So over the past few weeks, as you guys have seen, I'm sure reading things online, people emailing you stuff, there's been a lot of information out there about trauma-informed approaches during the coronavirus. And I'm one of those people who haven't sent out a whole lot, but I've been reading a lot of different articles, a lot of different posts on Facebook about what different people are doing. And I went through and picked some of the ones that I felt were the most informational and that were the most worthy of us to talk about today. And this is one that I really wanted to promote because they interviewed doctors from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which is a highly reputable agency. And they put their answers into this article. And so there'll be a link to this at the end if you want to read the whole article yourself. Also, if you've ever been to a trauma-informed care training for schools, you've probably heard of the Purple Book, or what some people refer to as the Bible, for trauma-informed care for schools. And they just put something out a few days ago, and it's really short. It's only 6 to 8 pages. And some of the information I'm going to talk about today, I also got from this brief that they put out. So the first thing I think it's important for us to remember is that trauma is not caused by an event. So trauma is actually caused by the reaction to an event. So right now, it's not fair to say that everybody that's living on this earth today is going to be traumatized because of COVID-19. Because the reaction is going to depend on your relationships and the resources that you have. So the supports that you have in place. And really, if we think about it, there's going to be two different kinds of people, or two different kinds of students in this case. There's going to be those students who we would call like student A. Those students are more resilient. They're going to be thriving right now, okay? So they're getting their daily meals. They're FaceTiming with their friends. They have access to the internet. They're going outdoors, maybe going for hikes with their family on the weekends. Their parents are still getting paid, so they haven't really noticed a huge change in really the world. What they're noticing is just that they get to stay home more. And for them, that's great, right? And so those students are going to come out of this feeling more resilient because it was a stressor. Yes, we're all going to feel some stress from this, but through that stressor, they're going to come out stronger. On the other hand, there's student B, and those are the students that are more vulnerable. And so what makes them vulnerable is the fact that they don't have the support and the resources and the relationships that the student A has. So they might have parents that are still working. They might have parents who have lost their jobs. And so if they've lost their jobs, they don't have that income that they were using to pay for the resources, right? So these are the ones who now don't have the money to have 3 meals a day. They might be only having 1 or 2. They're trying to figure out, where is our next meal going to come from? They might stay indoors. You don't know what neighborhoods different families are living in. And so if their neighborhoods are unsafe, then they're going to have to stay indoors. And so that's also something that we know helps with stress, is the ability to get outside and exercise and be out in the sun. And not all kids and not all adults have that, that availability to just go outside and play and run around. So that's the difference between what students and which people are going to come out of this stronger and which ones are going to be more vulnerable to having the effects of trauma and stress and social emotional issues after it's over. So who exactly are vulnerable students? Who are we talking about here? Well, the first thing I would say is that if you have a student who was vulnerable before, whenever we were still in school, those students are still going to be considered your vulnerable students. So those are probably the ones that you logged in today because you're already concerned about, right? So the students who have maybe mental health issues, anxiety, depression, you know that they have a high ACE score, you know that they might have had suicidal thoughts in the past, they might be special ed students that have learning or behavior disorders or have autism. And so those students are still the same ones that we want to keep a close eye on. Part of that is because if you think about those students, or think about the student that you have in mind right now, the reason that you're on this call right now, and imagine that you're walking down the hall with that student and you say to them, you know, I know we were going to have art today, but something changed and now we're going to have music, right? And so you guys know these kids. And so what's their response? Like, what do you mean? You know, nobody told me that. And how are we going to do that? And I said I wanted to do art and I had my heart set on going to art class. So that's a small change in their schedule, but you know how they respond to that. So imagine that same student now where nothing is predictable, right? Every day is unpredictable. And so that's why we have to think about those students, because they need schedule, they need routine, and they really need that predictability. And whenever everything is so unpredictable and it feels like they're living in a world that they can't control, they really need the supports. So although we have those students that we're already concerned about, I don't know how much you guys have thought about the additional vulnerable students that, because of the situation we're in right now, these students are vulnerable, but they weren't before. So these are students that we didn't have to think about before, and we might not even know exactly which students in our classes are now vulnerable, because these are going to be the students who their parents have lost their job or lost their income. Because if you lose your job or your income, you lose access to resources. If they have a parent who's a healthcare worker or who's an essential worker, their parents are still working every day. They might have picked up more hours. And so the kids are going to be home alone more, so they have less supervision. Also, if they're taking care of their siblings, because a lot of times daycares have closed. And so the older kids are responsible for the younger kids. And so not only are they going to do their own schoolwork, but they're probably responsible for helping their siblings get their schoolwork done as well. So imagine the stress of that. And if they can't help, then whenever the parent gets home from work, they have to sit down at the table and try and help multiple children get their schoolwork done. So that's what's going to make them vulnerable, because you can see the stress that would put on the relationship, which we said before. Relationship is another one of those protective factors from trauma with what's going on today. So we really don't know what we don't know. A lot of the students that you work with, you may not know, are they vulnerable or are they not? And so that's why it's important to reach out and talk to them and see how's things going. I think that this is one of the reasons why we're seeing a huge decrease in participation. I've had some schools say like maybe a third of the students are participating at this point. And I don't think it's because the student doesn't want to or because they don't care or because they've given up. I think that there's just so many other things that are more important right now. And the parents just may not have the time to focus on the kids' schoolwork. So as with anything, age is going to matter. So the age of the child is going to play a factor in how they're going to respond to this event as well. So preschool kids who are like ages 3 to 5, they're really just looking to their parents for signs. And so if their parent doesn't seem extra stressed or their parent doesn't seem like there's anything different about the world, then the child may not even know that anything is going on. What they might recognize is that there's been a change in my schedule. So if before they were going to a daycare and now instead they go to grandma's house, or maybe on the flip side, they haven't seen their grandparents for a month because of the social distancing, that would be something that children could worry about. But really with children that are this age group, I would say less is more. You really don't want them watching the news or talking about what's going on in front of them, because it just would be really scary, kind of like the fear of monsters under the bed. So as kids get older, you're going to approach it a little differently. With school age kids, you want to be honest with them, but keep it simple, keep it brief. Don't go into like huge details on what's going on, and explain it in an age appropriate way. So make sure that it's kind of on their level, and that you can filter some of the information. They don't need to know everything, right? And I had a friend that I talked to, and she talked about how with her kids, she's really focusing on the positives. So focusing on all the people out there who are helping the ones who are sick, you know, the healthcare workers, and also focusing on all the people who've recovered, because that number is astronomically higher than the number of deaths that we've had. So focusing on the positives. Also with school age kids, like ages 6 to 11 years old, they're at a good age now where they can start being able to talk to their friends on the phone. And so they can still check in with each other. I know my kids have downloaded this Facebook Kids Messenger app, and it's great because now on their iPads, they can message with their class friends that I've given them permission to message with. And so that's probably what they're doing right now while I'm down here talking to you guys. And so they're getting that relationship, and it really does, it takes away the fear factor of it because they see that their friends are safe, even though they haven't seen them for a while. Also with older kids, with teenagers, we all know teenagers, and the hardest thing is to understand, like, why has this disruption happened and changed my life? Like, this is not what I had planned for myself. And especially with those that are really mourning the loss of, you know, their prom and their graduation, which is completely understandable. And so I think the best thing we can do with those children is be empathetic with them. You know, yeah, we're fortunate because all of us got to graduate high school. You know, that was a memory that none of us will ever forget. And it is really hard to know that you're not going to be able to experience that. So I think just being empathetic with them, and also try and keep them forward thinking. So think about what's in the future. Okay. So we can't control that, but what are we going to do this summer? You know, what can we do to celebrate? Or can, you know, once this is over, let's plan a graduation party and let's have somebody still give you a certificate. Like, come up with something else that they can kind of put their mind on, that they can plan and think about for next year. You know, what are their plans for next year, and what are their goals and things like that. And so that forward thinking will help them not be so afraid and down on themselves for what's going on right now. So stress behaviors is something I didn't want to get into a whole lot because stress behaviors could be like a whole day Trauma 101 class, and that's not the purpose of this presentation. But I did think it was important to kind of touch on it just a little bit. The biggest thing is that with toddlers and preschoolers is that depression actually looks in a unique way. It's where they start to look hyperactive. They're whiny, they're restless, they're fidgety, they're demanding. So it looks kind of the opposite from depression with older children and teens, or even with adults, where they're sad and withdrawn. So if you know parents or you have children of your own who are starting to feel that way, it could be because, you know, maybe their parents working a lot more hours, and because of that, they're starting to feel depressed. And because of that, now they're starting to have hyperactive behavior. They're all over the place, changing their sleeping patterns. So we're all going to experience stress. And I think that's one really important thing to acknowledge, is that everybody's feeling stress in one way or another. The difference is that some stress is positive and some stress can be destructive. And so, sorry. So the way that we overcome stress, once again, is through those supports. And so if we have the supports during that stressful event, then we will come out with more resilience on the other side. So what we've learned from the ACE study, or adverse childhood experiences, is that if you have prolonged, extreme, unpredictable stress, then you're more likely to have social, emotional, physical health issues in the future. And so really what we're talking about here is, what are some things that we can do now? Because we know that right now is whenever there's a stressful event happening, what can we do right now so that we can prevent that from happening in the future? And I mean, it really goes back to what we just talked about. It goes back to the relationships and the resources. And if you've been to a trauma training, the biggest thing that we preach about trauma is relationship, relationship, relationship. And one thing you'll see is that that's really not, that hasn't changed. Just because the students aren't at school, still one of the number one things that we need to support them with is with our relationship. So what we all really want to know, especially because this is for educators, is, okay, how do we get them to learn, right? So they're not in our classrooms, but we need them to do these worksheets. We need them to continue learning because they need to get a grade, and we want to make sure that they pass. And so I think it's important that we just back up a little bit, okay? And we go back to what we learned in trauma training, which is about the brain, right? If you've done like the flip your lid, that's still the same, okay? So the first thing we need to do is regulate. And if you had children in your classroom who were very dysregulated, you probably had things that you did with them, or maybe you had like a sensory box or something that they used whenever they were feeling dysregulated. And they're probably still going to be dysregulated. You know, if they were dysregulated then, they might be dysregulated now. But do they have those tools at home? So one thing that I was thinking is maybe if you already know those kids, and I'll tell you, like right now, I've got my thinking putty, right? Because not that I'm dysregulated, but it just helps me. Like I have it in my hand all the time. Anybody who's ever worked with me will tell you that like Tiffany has her thinking putty. That's my thing. And I share it with others if I think that they might need it. It just helps me. And so if you know what helps another student regulate, maybe you could, if you have that around your house, or, you know, if you're going to the store anyway, pick that up and mail it to them. Sometimes like blowing bubbles with younger kids, you know, that's a regulation tool. Also, if there's music that they like to listen to, maybe just reminding them like, hey, you remember in class whenever you would get dysregulated and we would listen to music? I think that maybe that's something you should start trying to do while you're at home. If you have certain videos that you would show in your classroom, you know, send that link out so that the kids still have the videos that they can watch that just kind of helps them calm down. So these are just some ideas. I mean, there's a lot of different ideas out there on how to get kids to regulate. I think the biggest thing we need to remember is that they may not have the tools at home that they had at school to get regulated. So one of the things we would need to do is ask them what they do have and help them get those resources at home so that they can use them. The second thing is relationship, right? Relate. That's the limbic system. That's where we need to really get kids in tune with us. We need to get on their level. We need to build that relationship. And I know some people, and even myself, I've been like, well, you know, how are we supposed to build a relationship now? We can't, you know, be there. We can't sit with them. We can't give them our little side hug in the morning. But like a little story. So I actually met my husband on Facebook. So that probably tells you how old I am. But we met on Facebook. And we were online dating for quite a long time, right? We built our relationship, a whole foundation online. So between messages and we text each other, we called each other on the phone. We rarely ever video chatted, to be honest, because it just felt weird. So it was mostly just through phone calls and through emails that we really got to know each other. And for some kids, that might work out better, you know, if they feel awkward, like socially awkward, or have a hard time talking with people, maybe they would prefer to talk on the phone or to talk through email. So you can totally build a relationship without being with the person right next to the person. Also, if you think about people who have grandparents that are across, you know, live on the other side of the United States, they still have relationship with their family. So it is possible. Whenever you're trying to relate with a kid, it's the same things. It's learning about their family. It's learning about their hobbies. Do you know how many kids love Pokemon? And I was not a fan of Pokemon, but I had to become an expert, right? I had to learn about Minecraft, because if that's their jam, it needs to be your jam. Whatever they like, you need to take an interest in, because that's how you're going to be able to build a relationship. If you know their dog's name and you can say like, hey, you know, how's Morgan? That's my dog. Like, how's Morgan doing? You know, or how's your little sister? That is a good way to build a relationship. And that is a way that you don't have to do it one-on-one. You know, you don't have to be there in order to do that. So then once you get through steps 1 and 2, then you're ready to do that thinking brain, right? The prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that we really need them to use right now. That's whenever we need them to be calm and sit down and be able to do their schoolwork. And so once we get the first 2 steps, the regulation and the relate, then they're ready to do the reason part. But unfortunately, what we try and do too many times, and myself included, is we try and jump right to the reason part, right? We try and just say, hey, we need you to do this work or you're going to fail. And unfortunately, what that does is it dysregulates them and it harms the relationship. So you're actually working against yourself whenever you say things like that without actually going through step 1, step 2, and step 3. So So I could not have a training without a triangle because I'm a PBIS girl. So I want you to think about who is in each tier now. So I talked with some of my friends and their teachers, and I asked them, like, do you think that the kids are in the same tiers that they were in before? And they said, no, not necessarily. And so I want to talk about that some with you guys, because like we said before, some of the students who were in tier 2 may now be in tier 1 or maybe tier 3. There might be students who were tier 1 that now they've moved up because of their inaccess to because they're not able to access resources or because their relationships have changed. And so if we think about our 3 tiers, I would suggest that you think about your students that you're working with and go ahead and start thinking, like, who are my tier 1 kids? These are the kids that you have been able to you send your email out or you mail out the packet, it comes right back, right? Yay! Those are the kids that we love to be able to just, okay, here's the work, comes right back. So those are kids that you can just continue doing what you've been doing with. The tier 2 students, those are the ones who need a little bit more of a targeted intervention. So just like in school, they may need somewhat of a targeted group. So they might have those same assignments, but you connect them with maybe 2 other students in the class, and you give them a time that they can virtually get together, or they can do a phone call together or something, and that they can do the work on the phone. Or maybe it's not even schoolwork. Maybe they just need some extra support, social emotional relationships, and you're just hooking them up with some other kids and giving them a time to, if it's not natural for them, you may need to encourage it. And those are students that probably weekly check-ins would be good. Maybe once a week you give them a phone call and just ask, hey, how's things going? Is there anything that you need from me? What can I do for you? And then we have our tier 3 students, right? So these are the ones that are the most intense. These are the ones who are the most vulnerable, the ones that we're here to talk about today. And the more I've thought about it, I've decided that this is actually a great opportunity. And I know that some of you might be like, what? But really, it is a great opportunity because we now have ability to do one-on-one with kids, and as long as they have phone and internet access, of course. But we can now make a plan for students who are tier 3 where we can do it, and you can almost think of it like a home visit, right? Because I'm a social worker, so I think of home visits. But it's almost like a home visit, especially if you can do a Zoom call or a FaceTime, because they're going to be able to do that Zoom call, and it's one-on-one. So there you don't have the competition amongst their classmates, right? It's just you and them. And they can actually show you like a tour of their house. So I've talked to some therapists who are on the telehealth, and they said that it's been really awesome because the kids especially just want to show you everything. So all the stuff that they've talked about whenever they've come into the office, now you're getting to see firsthand because they want to show you their bedroom. They want to show you their parents. They want to show you their dog, their siblings. And so you're able to build a relationship even more so because you're actually getting to see those things and become part of like what's going on in their household. And on those calls, the focus is always going to be on relationship first, because we need to remember that 1, 2, and 3, right? So it actually could be, some of those calls in the beginning could be just on regulation. Like, hey, I'm going to call you tomorrow or whatever, and we're going to work on, like, what are you doing? What do you have around your house? Like, let's use the phone and I'll help you find some stuff around your house that's going to be able to help you regulate. So just remember that if you have a student who is tier 3, then using those tier 1 supports isn't going to work. So don't think that you can just send the work home and it's going to come back for a tier 3 kid, because no, that's why they're in tier 3. On the flip side though, tier 3 supports and tier 2 supports do work for tier 1 kids. And it is good for all kids to have these things. But as a teacher, I don't know how many kids each of you have in your classes or whatever, but it would be a lot to try and do tier 3 supports for all of the students that you work with. And so I think it's really important to recognize which kids do you have that are like especially at risk, and just pour a lot of energy into those students right now. So now we're going to start talking about the priorities. So the priorities are, what are things that we can do right now to offer support to vulnerable students or those who we know are the most at risk? And the first one is going to be routines and predictability, because just like we talked before, the routines and the predictability are things that those students who are vulnerable need day in and day out, whether school's in or school's not in. So some things you can do is giving those instructions that are easily comprehended. So break them down into steps. I mean, I would even say like bullet points or have like check boxes so that as they get done their work, they can see where they're at and how much they have left to go. Also, I would avoid putting all the work in a paragraph form because that's just really hard for them to organize and to figure out, okay, what's what here. So I would just totally stick to like the bullet points. And also just remember that some may be overwhelmed by weekly work. So I know some teachers are doing daily and some teachers are saying, here's your work for the week. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but just remember that some may be completely overwhelmed if you give them a whole week's worth of work at one time. Also with teaching new material, just remember, are they in a good place right now that they can learn new information? So, I mean, are they receptive to learning the information for one thing? And also, if it's new information, how are they going to learn it? Because I don't know about you guys, but I did take some college classes online, and then I found out it wasn't for me because I'm not good at self-teaching. And so I was like, I mean, I can, now that I'm older, I can do research online and learn that way. But whenever it comes to taking a class, I really need to be there. And so if you're going to teach new material, you may have to do a video of yourself and send that out, or talk with the parents and develop a plan on how the parent's going to teach the new material. Also having that predictable agenda and keeping your changes minimal and explaining the change ahead of time. So if you have always uploaded the work on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, then they're starting to get used to that routine of you uploading the work Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And I guarantee you at like 8 o'clock, they're checking at 8:01, like what's been uploaded. And so suddenly if you don't upload it, then that's going to cause stress. And so really the purpose of all of these priorities is how do we decrease the stress so that we can support the kids? And so these are just some tips that you can use. The next one would be flexibility. And this is understanding of their home circumstances. So are they home alone? Are the parents working from home and are the parents stressed? And so being able to be flexible with deadlines, like not everything has to be due by Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And also working with other teachers who have that student to say, what days are your work due? Because I know that a lot of students, they have multiple teachers. And so I don't know if the teachers are really communicating on when each of their timelines are, but that could really add a lot of stress if they all have the same due date. If everybody's stuff is due on Friday by 4 o'clock, then that might be more stressful for the parents and for the students. Also, try and think about, like, if you're not getting much work out of some of the students, then what are they interested in? Because the more interest that we have in something, the more motivated we are to learn about it. And so, as you can see, I have a picture here of a sports car, of like a muscle car, because a few years ago, I had a fifth grader who completely refused to even go to class. So he just like wanted to sit in my office all day. And I was having a really hard time getting him to do any of his work. But then once I found out that he liked muscle cars, I found all kinds of things that I could do with muscle cars and with the way they were built and when they were built. I mean, history stuff, the engine. And we were able to learn a lot through his interest on muscle cars. So that's what I mean by being flexible. And allow the family some room to include what they're already doing into the lesson. So if you have a family who is vulnerable and they're at risk, but you know that they love to garden, or they love to, or they're doing something around their house, they're building something, or whatever it may be, maybe they cut wood together, they split wood, whatever interests them, how can you use that to be part of the lesson that you're already going to teach anyway, so that you can use that to give them points. One of the biggest priorities is going to be communication. And we've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but one thing I want to mention is that some teachers have said, well, I don't feel comfortable calling students from my house. Like, I don't want them to have my cell phone number. And that's a completely valid point. And I understand that 100%. I have been pranked called. So that's why they have a lot of apps out there now. There's Google Voice, the Remind app, and those are able to keep your number private. And so I would really recommend downloading something like that if you do have privacy concerns. But on the flip side, there's also privacy concerns for the student, right? Because before, they were able to come into your office and shut the door, come into your classroom and shut the door, and they were able to talk to you about whatever was on their mind. And with them being in the home, you don't know whose cell phone it might be. Maybe they're using their parent's cell phone. Maybe they don't have a place that they can go and get privacy. Or even if they do go in a room and shut the door, they still might not feel 100% comfortable really talking to you like they would if they were in your office. So just be mindful of that as well. Also, develop a concrete plan. So as you guys know right now, if you don't make a plan, then it doesn't seem to happen. I won't tell you that, well, I will tell you, I've watched a lot of Netflix lately, right? So you need to have a plan. You need to keep something like an agenda of your schedule. And it helps them too to know, okay, when is my teacher calling? So am I going to call them once a week? Am I going to call them 3 times a week? What time am I going to call them? And is it going to be a phone call or is it going to be a Zoom call? Who's going to call who? Lay all of that out, because don't leave much room for error if you have it down to the T of exactly when you're going to call so that everybody's on the same page. On those phone calls, it's good to ask about any barriers they may be having to getting food or supplies, but I wouldn't just come out and say, like, do you have food? Like, what's going on? I would go about it with, say, like during your, talk or whatever, just asking like, hey, what'd you have for dinner last night? What have you been eating for breakfast? And just kind of working that into the conversation somehow, however you see fit. And, if you do that a couple times, then you're going to be able to get a good idea of, are there barriers to food or supplies? Also, are they receiving all the services that they had at school? So I know a lot of schools, they received school-based therapy, or maybe they had somebody that was coming in that was meeting them for different reasons. Even with CASA volunteers, or if you have a PASS program, those are all relationships that student had at school. And so can you help them with building a bridge so that they still get those services? Can you maybe let your school counselor know if it has to do with therapy, or your PASS volunteer, like, hey, Billy had been working with this PASS volunteer and it was, really worthwhile. And how do we connect them? How do we get their numbers exchanged so that they can still continue that relationship? So that would be something else that you could talk about on the phone with them. And giving them a chance just to talk about their thoughts and feelings. These communication phone calls are really just to build relationship, to help with those first 2 steps, right? To regulate and to build relationships, and just showing that you care, Kids love getting a phone call. They get so excited whenever the phone is for them. And I know with younger kids, a lot of times the phone call is with the parents, but I mean, does it hurt to just say to the parent, hey, I was calling to talk to you, and I like, that we could check in like this. And I was just wondering, like, could I actually talk to Billy for a few minutes, even if he's in kindergarten, 1st grade, whatever, because that really is going to mean a lot for that kid that you actually got to talk to them on the phone. They would be so excited. Another thing that you can do is if there's certain like service personnel at your school who have relationships with these students. So if there's a custodian that really already had a relationship, or a secretary that has a relationship with an at-risk student, can you help them exchange phone numbers, or can you give those service personnel their address so that they can send them a card in the mail? Because I think, we're talking about right now is relationships and resources. And if they already have that relationship and it kind of just drops off, then it's not going to be a good protective factor for them whenever it comes to trauma. So let's try and keep those relationships going that were already established as much as what we can. And you guys are the teachers, so you're the experts. You know who your kids love in your school, okay? So it's just a matter of making sure that they're still connected to those people. So this is a little video that I added. It's about empathy, because in all of our conversations right now, empathy really is the key. And so I'm going to try and see if it's going to play for you guys. It's only about 2.5 minutes.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So our next priority would be connectedness. And that is just saying we will get through this together. And that kind of goes back to the empathy that we were just listening to. So like, it's rather than saying, like, let me think of a COVID example. Oh, I lost my job. And then somebody says, well, at least you get unemployment. That's not helpful, because it is still really hard for people who've lost their jobs. And even if you fought unemployment, from what I've heard, it takes a while to get the checks, and it's that unpredictableness and things like that. And so saying at least is really not helpful. And so just really connecting with the person and being empathetic to, and being a listening ear for whatever's that they're going through. So connectedness is just remember to connect with every family. So I have a feeling that there might be some families out there that we're not able to reach right now. And so what are we doing about that? Who's tracking that? And does your school have some kind of a system? Does your team have some kind of a system? So if we don't know which kids haven't had somebody reach out to them, then we don't know if they're safe. We don't know if there's something more that we need to do for that family. And also decide who is going to be the connector for families that are at risk, because the last thing you want to do is have 5 different people calling them every day or every other day. And they're all, with a good heart, because they want to make sure that the family's okay. But families can get really turned off by that and get really annoyed by it. So you don't want to bombard the family. And also if they have multiple students at home. So, I have 2 kids, so I'm talking with 2 teachers. But if you had 4 kids, that would be 4 teachers. And so if those teachers, maybe if 2 of them are in the same grade or if they're in the same school, if those teachers could kind of work together and even come up with a plan that, hey, we've got, this family has 3 kids. We know that they're really stressed out right now. Let us 3 teachers get together and come up with a way that we can organize the assignments for each day. And then one of us is going to be the communicator with that family and is going to get them the assignments. So all of that is how we're decreasing the stress level in this home. As far as with the students, some online suggestions is if you are doing virtual talks, give the kids a little bit of time in the beginning so that they can talk amongst themselves, just like they would in the morning at school, right? As soon as they get into school, kids need that time to kind of just vomit out everything that they've been thinking or everything that's going through their minds. And so giving them a time to do that. And sometimes it might be a little awkward. And this is something that Alicia talks about on her training that she did on PBIS and Matrix for online learning. giving them prompts so that you can say like, so everybody tell me one fun thing that you did last week. And then the kids take turn talking about that thing. Also, like I said before, putting them into small groups so they can work online. And I don't know much about this personally, but apparently you can do virtual puzzles and scavenger hunts if you group kids together online. So that's going to build that connection as well. I'm going to go back real quick. So also wanted, well, actually I can do it on this one. For the priorities for the sense of safety, I want to talk a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you guys have probably all heard of before. But just a reminder that it's another triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle is your basic needs and your sense of safety, right? And once those are met, then you can move up to the next step, which is relationships and a feeling of self-worth, a feeling of esteem, like I can accomplish things. And then the top of that triangle is your full potential, right? You're able to be creative. And so right now, most of us are working out of the bottom part, the sense of safety, the getting my basic needs met. And then hopefully we can do some of those relationships and stuff. But just keep in mind that the ability to do their schoolwork is at the very top of that triangle, especially if we're asking them to be creative. It just might not be something that is something that they're going to be able to do right now. So with the sense of safety, that is really just knowing that your needs are met and that those that you care about, their needs are going to be met as well. And that you're protected from harm, that you're not going to get hurt. And so a lot of kids right now, if they've seen people on the news, if they know that they go to the store and they see that a lot of people are wearing masks, I mean, that can really threaten their sense of safety. If they have a family member that's lost their job, that kind of is one of the greatest ways to lose your sense of safety, is if a parent has lost their employment. So school has always kind of served as the safety net, and school has always been the place that has been able to, it's like the umbrella of the girl standing in the rain. The school acts as the umbrella to help protect the kid from anything that's pouring down, from the pouring down rain. And so some teachers have said, well, I realize this and I really want to help the kids in my classroom, but I don't know like who to refer them to. You know, I'm not a school counselor. And yeah, you're right. You're not a school counselor, but what you are right now is on the front lines of this. And so with the contacts that you have, and you're the expert on the kids in your class, right? You know all of them better than anybody else. And so I think it makes sense for teachers to have a resource list. And whether this is something that the county puts out or that your school puts out to your teachers, I just think that you need to arm your teachers with the information, because they're the ones that are developing these relationships, that are getting the trust, and they're going to be able to give the information to the families. And maybe it's not a huge resource list with, okay, who do I call for the electric bill, or who do I call for unemployment? Who do I call if I need a meal? Maybe your school has a community partner. Like I know I'm from Morgan County. We have Starting Points there. So maybe it's just that, okay, the plan is that teachers are going to connect families with Starting Points, with this one agency that we can rely on in our community, that then that agency will be the person that gets them where they need to get their needs met. So that would be another option. Safety and well-being. So during school, we often say that those kids are hard to reach, right? Like we say that all the time. Well, now that's literal. Like those same kids that are hard to reach really are like hard to reach. Like we may not be able to contact them. And so what are we going to do about that? What can we do if we lose contact with a child? And this is something that I've been asking from the very beginning, because like as a member of the National Guard, I was ready to jump in a Humvee and go look for kids up the hollers, but nobody gave me permission to do that. So, but what I found out was that it really varies by county what you do if you cannot contact a child. But in most situations, it's going to involve like up-channeling that information to your school administration. So up-channeling it to your principal, to your counselor, and get like an army of people to start looking for this child, to start figuring out like, has anybody heard from them? Because maybe you haven't, but maybe somebody else has. And whenever we do that, whenever we up-channel that, hey, we're having a hard time connecting with this certain kid, it's really important to keep teachers in the loop with the updates. Because nothing's more frustrating than being worried about a child and you pass along that information and then you go days or even a week and you don't hear anything back. And so that plays a part into the teacher's mental health, because right now, I mean, secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue are still alive. And so we need to make sure that we're taking care of our teachers as well and that we're keeping them on the loop because they are worried about these kids. Student log contacts. So whether each teacher has their own log, or maybe your school has set up a log or a team has set up a log, but just some way that you guys can communicate with each other on which kids you've heard from and which kids you haven't. It's just easier to remember because all your days will start to run together and you start to forget, like, when was the last time I heard from this kid? So if you could keep a log of that, that way you can stay for sure. And it's good to be able to share that because you don't want to bombard the family so that other people can see how often you've been in touch. And if you have a student that you've been working with and that you just know, like maybe another kid told you like something's going on with Billy, I don't know what it is, you can still send a referral to your school counselor. Just like if school was in and you had a concern about a student, absolutely still send a referral to your school counselor. They're still working right now and they would be more than happy to reach out to these students and work with them on their social emotional learning, or just to be there as a listening ear. Maybe that's not something you feel comfortable doing. So that's why you have your school counselor, and it's actually prime time right now to refer kids to the counselor for those things. Also, if your school has like a school resource officer or local law enforcement, you can ask them to do a welfare check. And sometimes this might involve where they're actually taking the food to the family. And whenever they do that, they get eyes on that family. One of my teacher friends in Morgan County said that she has a student that she could not get in touch with for several weeks. And then finally, they found that if they took food, that they could get in touch with them. And so now they have their Officer Barney that is going there every week and taking food and just checking in on the kids. So we all are still mandated reporters. So if you do suspect abuse or neglect, you need to call the hotline, just like you would if school was in session. And just remember that we're not investigators, right? We're just a reporter. And so it's not up to us to figure out, well, is it true or is it not? If you even suspect it, you need to call the number. It's always better to be safe than to be sorry. So we need to cultivate hope. Hope is one of those things that if you have hope, you can make it through another day. And so a part of having hope is being able to establish those long-term and short-term goals. And this could be something small or it could be something large. It doesn't matter. It's just something that is helping them look forward to the future. Create a plan to reach them. So, and it doesn't have to be written down, but just talking with kids about, what are you going to do this summer? Or what are your goals for next school year? Or, how many books do you want to read? Or I don't know, whatever you want to work with that kid on to try and come up with some forward thinking things so that they have something to look forward to. Also, I saw that West Virginia is going to have a statewide prom, I think, at the Civic Center. And I think that's awesome because, a lot of high schoolers are really upset that they're not going to have their prom. And so by them planning a prom in the future, it gives them excitement, right? They still have their date and they still have their dress, and now they have a time where they get to wear it. And so anything that we can do to help cultivate that hope is a really great way to support kids. So those students who have high hopes, you guys can see on the slide, they are going to be more successful academically, better friendships, they can be creative, low rates of depression and anxiety, right there, bingo, right? Less likely to drop out. And so we really want to figure out how can we cultivate hope in those kids. Empowerment. So mirroring, so telling children what strengths they have, because they might not be getting that a lot at home right now. They might not have a parent who is going to be nurturing their little hearts. And so it's still kind of up to us to remind them like how amazing they are and find those things that we can do that we can really just boost them up and tell them what strengths they have and believe in them. Like, I know you can do this, and I'm going to give you this extra challenge that I'm not giving any other kids because I believe in you. And little things like that mean so much to kids and even adults, right? That little encouragement that, I believe in you and I know you can get this done. And help kids think about, like, what do they like about themselves? You know, what's good about me? Why am I unique? Am I a rock star? If they're a rock star, tell them they're a rock star. You know, they'll start to believe that. And then whenever you give them opportunities to make choices, they feel empowered that, wow, I can make these choices on my own and I'm going to make good decisions. And so by giving them empowerment, it's another way that we can show support to our most at-risk kids. Whenever we think about the whole child lens, it's actually a prime learning environment right now to do project-based learning, because it's the relationships, the safety, and the connectedness. And this is one of those things that it's really good for all kids, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, because it's easily adapted to meet the family's needs. And so if you're trying to teach certain skills and you know that, wow, those same skills could be taught if a family, and I keep saying planting a garden because this time of year, a lot of people are planting gardens. And so you can do so many lessons around planting a garden. And so that's just one example of project-based learning, but you know, any kind of momentum needs to be rewarded. And so we're not looking for perfection right now. We're just looking for them to make forward momentum. And this is one way that we can do it, is by doing some project-based learning. We really need to provide the support to the family. And I know that it goes back to, well, you know, we're not the experts or we can't do this, but I'm here to tell you that if you're a teacher, you're an expert on kids. And even if you don't have biological kids, you're still an expert. And so this is actually a prime opportunity that we can actually do some parent support, right? Some parent education, and checking in with the parents and talking to them about what worked for you in your classroom. So if you have a student that could not sit for more than 5 minutes and was always up out of their seat, I would say the parent's probably struggling with that same thing right now at their dinner table, trying to get the same student to get their work done. And so why not share what you already know? Because you've already tried 100 other things and nothing worked. And now you found the one thing that worked. Why not share that with the parent and say, hey, I don't know if you're struggling with this, but this is what I did, and it seemed like it really helped. You know, I mean, it could be something like the thinking putty, right? Like while they were doing this class, I let them play with thinking putty, or with learning, you know, instead of doing this worksheet, I would use Play-Doh and I would have them roll out that many balls for 7 minus 9 or whatever, instead of writing it on the worksheet. Whatever learning and behavior supports that you were using at school, share those with the parents, because they're going to be so thankful for you giving them to them, so that they don't have to have that fight, because the more that we can provide to them, the less stress they're going to have, right? And that's the whole point of everything that we're doing right now. Also giving guidance to caregivers on how to establish a routine, how to establish child responsibilities, and have reasonable expectations of their children. So if you know it's not possible for Billy to sit for more than 15 minutes, but his parent might not realize that and might just think, well, he needs to do it, and they're trying to make him sit at the table for an hour and get all of his work done at once, and it's a huge battle that, you know, as the teacher, that parent's not going to win, but the parent is just in a control thing with that child. Why not help the parent understand, like, these are the reasonable expectations? You know, even at school, I could only get them to sit for about 15 minutes, but then if I give them a 5-minute walk break, or, you know, let him take a little snack break or something like that, then he could come back and he could do 15 more minutes right away. Just do that 5-minute break. Whatever worked for you, help the parent so that they can try that at home and see if it'll work for them. So taking teaching staff from overwhelmed to empowered. I talked to several teachers to prepare for this, and what I found was that a lot of them are feeling very overwhelmed, right? We've never done this before. We've never been here before. It's totally new to all of us. And we all really are doing the very best that we can with what we have. And so one of the things that I found online was that connection is actually the ultimate self-care strategy for teachers right now. So encourage staff cohesion, teamwork, and collaboration. Have them continue to work together so that they're not on their own, feeling like they have to come up with all their lessons on their own. And also giving clear guidance to the staff. So my daughter loves Frozen. So into the unknown is not good, right? So even if you don't know as the leader of your school, it's kind of like you need to figure out what can you create something so that the teachers have something to go off of, because the last thing you want is for everybody to have to come up with their own stuff, because that creates stress. And it creates a lot of work where there doesn't need to be, right? It's like work smarter, not harder. So if you have different people who have really good ideas in your school, let's share those so everybody can use those same ideas rather than everybody have to come up with those ideas on their own. Also, creating that structure and predictability within the school, within your staff. Maintain virtual faculty meetings and team meetings. So if you every Thursday at 3 o'clock had a faculty meeting, would it be possible to still have those faculty meetings for your staff so that they still feel some sense of community and some sense of cohesion? And like, maybe it's not at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, but can you still at least have the faculty meeting within that week? Also, if there was team meetings that were normally scheduled once a week, can you continue to have those team meetings virtually? Because whenever you can get them together, they can brainstorm, they can problem solve about what's going on. And it's really just that sharing of ideas, like what's working for you, what have I tried? And that's going to all decrease the stress. Principals are also offering office hours to staff, and Mark Ellis, who's one of our, who's the director of the ATC, he's actually doing like coffee chats where he's on Zoom and you can just log in and people can talk or you can not talk. And so the principal would basically just be sitting at his desk or her desk and have Zoom open, and staff can log in or not. It's kind of like being able to stop in and just chat and then leave whenever you're done. So that's a good idea too, to make teachers feel more empowered, like they have somebody that they can talk to. And just as like a side note is to be respectful of others' working hours and maintaining boundaries. So a lot of us are also teaching our own children right now. And so, you know, it's better if we can kind of keep to some of those same working hours as much as what we can, so that if somebody else has done work at 4 o'clock and then they're spending the evenings with their family and not talking about school and not even looking at their computer, then's not a good time for you to be sending out a lot of emails and expecting responses right away. So just remember those boundaries. This is an email that I got that talked about the free West Virginia mental health resource. And so I thought this was good to share because it's a 1-866 number. It's for all West Virginians who have anxiety or stress. And so it's free, it's 24/7. And I think this is a good number that everybody could just write down, because you can share it with anybody that you know who has any kind of stressors right now and needs some extra help. So as with anything, we have to have a little action plan at the end. So here's some things that I would suggest that you start to look at to move your school or move your, if you're a teacher, move your class into like a forward way of being trauma informed. One thing you need to do is just create that way to track contact with those most vulnerable students attending your school. And remember, those tier 3 students are going to need more supports. And so they might take a little bit more of your time, but it's going to be worthwhile in the end. Also, deciding who will act as the point of contact and build relationships with that student and that family. So that way we're not bombarding the family with 100 different people calling 100 different times. Ensure teachers have access to local resource lists or the number to a local agency providing referrals for families. Teachers aren't going to ask the questions on if the family has needs if they don't have the tools to provide. And so it's really up to us to make sure that all the teachers have all the tools so that if a family does need support, they can provide it. They can give them the number, they can give them the resource list. And also, some families, especially if they're under a lot of stress right now, they might prefer if you say to them, well, I have this resource. Do you mind if I call them and give them your name and number, and then they can be in touch with you? And some families prefer that because they know if they just write down the number, they probably will never call it. And so that's another good suggestion, is that you ask permission to just do a referral on their behalf, and then the agency calls the family. Keeping connection with and between teachers is a priority because it's ultimate self-care tool. So just trying to keep communication alive amongst staff members. I just wanted to share this. This is our website at the bottom. And if you have any technical assistance needs with the West Virginia Behavior and Mental Health Center, this is our website that you can go on and you can do a request. And this also shows you who your behavior support specialist is for your region and all of our email addresses. And Once the PowerPoint is posted, these are all links. So you can click on any of these. And this is where I got a lot of the information on this PowerPoint. So if you want to learn more about any of the specific topics, these are some links that you can go to read more about them. And these are the specific references that I use that I had showed you in the beginning, and anything that I have read that I thought that it really helped me better understand how to work with vulnerable students right now. So that is actually the end of my slideshow. And I think that Jim said that we are going to go over the chat box and see if there's any questions that anybody has that we can talk.
Amy Kelly, do you want to, any specific questions you want to bring up?
We didn't really have any specific questions. We had a lot of folks share some good tips of how they have been able to communicate with students and still maintain some, what is the word that I'm looking for? Privacy, or not sharing their cell phone or home number. We did have a comment from someone that was just talking about agreeing with not wanting to bombard parents, that as a counselor, she had been working with a family prior to COVID, and as she's been reaching out, the family had specifically said to pretty much stop calling because they were feeling overwhelmed. We did share, I put the West Virginia DE COVID website, which is where folks can also use that as a great resource.
And the recording, like we said, would be posted on the wvpbis.org site, and we can put a link to that. Amy, can you put a link to that exact page
right
in
now.
the chat box?
Yes, sir.
And like I said, we usually turn those recordings over in about 24 hours, so that should be up pretty quickly, and we'll be able to, folks, you can share that with folks, and because I know there's a lot of great information in here, Tiffany, about an approach. I think there's been a lot of conversation about we've got to do something, and everybody feels disoriented, but I really especially liked that you had those priorities, and then at the end you had that action plan, because I think that's what administrators are really going, that's where leadership's really going to happen right now, is administrators saying, all right, we're going to create an action plan. We're going to identify our most vulnerable students, and we're going to figure out, and we're going to use these priorities to make sure that we're, first of all, identifying who might be a vulnerable student, and then how we might prioritize who, what, when, and where. So fantastic job with that, Tiffany.
Thanks.
All right.
And we just may want to mention also that our next and actually final Zoom meeting to this series that we have been doing since the beginning of the month will be next week, and it will be on self-care specific to the pandemic. We have sent those links out, but if for some reason you did not get it or would like the link to the meeting, just reach out to one of us and we can get that to you. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. Alicia, Tiffany, if you guys care to do that as well.
Hey, Amy, it's Lisha. I'm going to send that out again as well, because we've added several people to the contact list.
Fantastic. We've had a very positive response to all of this, and we are trying to get the information out to everyone and anyone. We are limited. This one actually sold out, which is very exciting. We had people that were in the waiting room, and I'm not sure that everyone made it in, but we did want to create an avenue that we can share it with everyone if you do not make the live recording. So we are very excited about the response.
For more information regarding the West Virginia PBIS project, you can go to www.wvpbis.org. For more information regarding the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center, you can go to www.marshall.edu/BMHTAC. For the most current information regarding the West Virginia Department of Education's response to the COVID-19 crisis, you can go to www.wvde.us/COVID-19. This site also has resources for families as well as educators.